Welcome to the Victory Through Training podcast presented by the Combined Arms Center Training at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Views expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent the views of the Combined Arms Center, the U.S. Army, or the U.S. government. The history of training in the U.S. military is long and storied. Too long to really go into today. However, here's a super quick rundown of the recent history of the Combined Arms Center Training, CAC-T. In 1973, the Training and Doctrine Command, TRADOC, was formed. In 1977, the Combined Arms Training Development Activity was created. In 1984, it was renamed the Combined Arms Center Training Activity. And in 1990, it was renamed the Combined Arms Center Training. From 1990 to 2003, the organization was restructured a few times and changed location from Fort Leavenworth to Fort Monroe, and then back again to Fort Leavenworth, where most of CAC-T now conducts business. As of December 2020, the organizations that make up CAC-T include the Army Training Support Center, ATSC, Center for Army Lessons Learned, COL, Combat Training Center Directorate, CTCD, Mission Command Training Program, MCTP, National Simulation Center, NSC, and the Training Management Directorate, or TMD. But none of that really answers the question, what does CAC-T do? I'm Tisha Swart-Entwistle, the CAC-T Public Affairs Specialist, and your host for today's podcast. For this episode, episode 0, we will be introducing you to some of what CAC-T does and how the organization affects change in the way soldiers are trained for battle, setting the stage for future podcasts. With me today is CAC-T Deputy Commander Colonel Charles Lombardo. Sir, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Tisha, for having me. I'm really honored to be here.
I began working for this organization in May of 2020. And Colonel Lombardo took responsibility of CAC-T in July of 2020. One of the things we immediately discussed was expanding the understanding of what CAC-T is. So that is what we are aiming to do with this podcast and some of the other products and campaigns we have recently launched. Can we start with the CAC-T elevator pitch? What is CAC-T?
Hey, that's a great question, and I think it's at a great time as I feel we are in our second, I call it training renaissance. You know, the first, I would say, is in the formation of our Big Five post-Vietnam War, of an all-volunteer force. And it brought us and delivered the leaders that we have today that made what we're doing today even possible. But just to start off, the CAC-T, you know, we start with an acronym, is the Combined Arms Center for Training. It is, and it started in earnest as the combat arms development of a Combined Arms Center, really around that 73 timeframe as the formation of TRADOC, and then really during the Combat Training Center developments when we started to first see our first Combat Training Center, which was a national training center in the mid-'80s. And so today we help coordinate, synchronize, advocate much of the training in the United States Army. I would tell people, when I first meet them, if you're, from the company training meeting out to the screen line and beyond where we're delivering joint fires, if the round is shot, the range that it's been trained on the Army training networks that it's been conducted on and managed, CAC-T has a piece of that in support of our soldiers and leaders and civilians in today's Army.
So how about some background on how training has evolved since 2005?
Okay. The past 15 years, I would say that there's been some major training improvements. And if you recall, just kind of looking back in 2006, where were we? We were in the middle of a surge in Iraq, and we were going, doubling the amount of forces that we were trying to deliver 5, additional brigade combat teams. We were 5 years into Afghanistan. We just started year one of our Army Force Generation, and we were a year into our modularity. So we transformed the design of the brigade combat teams. And we're, as an Army, we were fighting an Army of Excellence now to this R4 Gen cycle. And it was, the methodology was interesting. You would build a unit, individually train it, put it into a combat training center, MRX, if you will, and deliver it into a theater for a commander, a combatant commander, and then you would bring it back and break it all down to pay and move those personnel to the next formation. So we did that, and it served us well, that model, for 11 plus years. And what we learned in sustaining that is that at times we lost some of our core competencies in training because the glide path was so fast. You were being fielded, you were conducting new equipment training, new equipment fieldings every 3 years on a cycle. Our equipment wasn't really being maintained in a long term by our soldiers and leaders. It was in a national reset done, our civilian corps and industry came and really it lifted us up on a mantle to enable that rapid turn every 3 years on that cycle. And so we lost, I think, a lot of repetitions. We lost ownership of a lot of the training that we would do. It fundamentally changed the Combat Training Center program. The execution of a mission rehearsal exercise was not the Super Bowl event that as even General Milley would say, it wasn't that crucible training event that you had to get through and work so hard to be deployed and ready to serve and across the line of departure. It was another certification, but it was mission focused on that mission rehearsal and not necessarily focused on decisive action, large-scale combat operations. Not to say that it was easier, it was just different. And I think in executing those types of missions and types of training, we lost a little bit of leader development opportunities. So there's a generation of leaders that didn't execute decisive action for 11 plus years. And so, and then it served us well. But now, as we, kind of move into the development of decisive action, starting around the 2015-16 timeframe, and then the transition to the sustainable readiness model, it gets us kind of back to what we're redoing in FM 7.0 in our doctrine, and that is trying to keep formations in that band of excellence, and train as you fight, and it's not departing completely from the coin mentality. I think we are still trying to ensure that we retain those skill sets, but we have to be prepared to fight along the continuum of conflict.
And COIN is counterinsurgency.
And counterinsurgency, yes. And that's why, and it's been great what we've learned in moving into decisive action and large scale combat operations. We identified there's gaps, the 17, they call them LISCO gaps, and that we've, it's been through that campaign of learning that we've identified those organizational training, doctrinal gaps. And here at CAC, General Rainey's, working hard with our Center of Army Lessons Learned and the rest of our teammates to highlight those and then reinsert fixes to those kind of training gaps, whether it's organization, force design updates, and then CAC-T's arm is to provide a training environment that we can rectify those gaps and provide a trained and ready force to be able to be prepared. We got back to the other, I think, secondary effects that we've learned is from a maneuver brigade and below is, the simple things of hardening our command post and being ready to fight tonight. Our command post used to be big amphitheater. During the COIN era, command posts it would take my brigade command time. My first time I set my brigade command post up, it took me 21 hours. And it was big and grand, and it had berms around it and glorious. And then by the time we traveled to the National Training Center, we were at about the 3-hour mark, great gap that we reduced. By the time we ended our National Training Center rotation going into the Middle East, we were under 2 hours. And it's those it really highlighted and illustrated the criticality of those reps and sets, those repetitions and sets, to allow units to do it ad nauseum, to get it lighter, to get it faster, to get it more functional. And I think that's been how our Army has changed in the move to decisive action. I think the other thing that we've learned in this kind of fight and in the decisive action training environment, which is they call that the DATE environment, and we've worked with the TRADOC G2 in establishing the DATE environment. It's a common training environment that the Army can use, but it's a known point that we can train against, and it is harder than the fight. We want all of our training to be harder than, so no soldier goes untrained into combat. That is our mandate. But we started that really at the brigade level. The last 2 to 3 years, we have increased that exponentially at the division and corps level. And as I'll talk a little bit later, some of our formations, the Mission Command Training Program, has played a large hand in that, in increasing that rigor in getting division and corps CPs out on their tactical internet infrastructure, maneuvering around and making, fighting and making those decisions to enable their command and control. And that takes us to where we're at and where we're going. And I think the advent and implementation of multi-domain operations. We've experienced it a lot of it in the Middle East, in Europe. I mean, in our during competition and conflict, as we've been in contact or in conflict since 2001. And so what we're doing in CAC-T is trying to replicate as close to possible those near-peer threats and those intrusions into our training environment at our Combat Training Center program, and more importantly, at home station. So, as we kind of rebalance our training strategy to have a little more emphasis back at home station, we can practice and get exposed to some of those capabilities against our force, so we can then account for it in our CTCs, but more importantly, be prepared as we deploy in support of the geographical combatant commanders' needs. And looking at the progress that we've made, I think, over the last 5 to 6 years, as a part of the Combined Arms Center for Training, we were fortunate. We have 6, I think, very talented organizations of soldiers and civilians and family members, and that range from the Training Management Directorate, we call it TMD. The TMD has been, foundational in that they are creating and writing the new FM 7-0 and train the way we're going to fight. It is a lot of senior leaders will say it's a blast from the past, because I purposely, myself and Joe Rainey purposely have tried to orient it back to a how-to manual to help in decisive action and large-scale combat operations, to arm leaders with illustrations, examples, and linkages of leader development into training, and kind of that link there, and the focus on small unit training. There's been a lot of great initiatives by our Army senior leaders to get commanders and leaders and first sergeants out of the training room and as data managers, and then get them out in the field as training managers, and train and combat leaders, and not really managers, but leading. In our previous models, it was just hard enough to manage training. Do I have the bullets? Do I have the people in the location? Is the equipment delivered at the training area? Is the OPFOR in place? And that the commander was consumed with just doing that. In 7.0, we're trying to take it to that next step and to really arm commanders to be able to lead training. We're not going to wait and go to the Combat Training Center and do an MRX and they'll tell us how we're doing. We take advantage, and this is put the training in your own fate, and you can control that at your level. And that's what 7.0 is intended to do, and that's what the Training Management Directorate does. They're delivering 7.0. But in addition to that, they manage the unit training management, and it's a class. We do it as a mobile training team where they'll go to every division and corps and brigade, and they're teaching our junior leaders, hey, here is the connection of doctrine, here is the digital training management system, and that DTMS is like the connective tissue of the Army's training system. So if you have the personnel program has IPSA, and it's an integrated pay and finance and services. It's a talent management, almost a new capability that the CSA has been delivered, and we collaborate, with Colonel Greg Johnson. But ATIS is to training, as IPSA is to personnel and finance. And so the Army Training Information System is another thing that we're kind of working with TMD and some of our, the Training Management Directorate and some of our future stuff. But it's to really connect all that together to be able to populate training and record training, and I call it at the point of performance. So, and by doing that, squad leaders populating their training, we put it back into the lower level leaders. We don't have that single point of failure or that bubble, which is the company commander, the first sergeant. So that, to me, that unencumbers the commanders and the command teams itself, because we're doing it at the squad level. You populate that training once, and now it's populated and it's integrated in all your training records. And so we're spending more of our time on the battlefield or in the training in the training area outside of than being behind a computer somewhere. So that's TMD. The second directorate is the Army Training Support Center, and it consists of a lot of big organizations that do great things for the Army. So like I said in my opening kind of monologue, it handles the live training, so which has all the, we call it force on force, all the miles, all the integrated laser engagement systems that you put on your tank, your person, your paladin. They manage that and move it around the Army. They maintain it in the Army, and they procure and sustain it. And we deliver that to every commander based on when they need it. It's the targetry that they shoot. We call that force on target, but they're doing everything from modernizing ranges to sustaining ranges to building range utilization, and call it RIFMIS, but it's a management system that allows junior leaders to conduct live fire safely. And that's, to me, that's the same type of training that RIFMIS that you would do in a combat environment. If you're dropping a bomb on an enemy, you got to provide that surface danger safety assessment so you don't hurt civilians. That essentially is what we do in garrison, and that's another component of that. They manage the ammo, that we call it the STRAC, but it's the ammo allocation for the Army, and they manage all that with a lot of other support from CASCOM and our other agencies, and they do the analytical work. The Chief said, all the $2.2 billion in our PEG, in the training program evaluation group, they help manage that for the Army G357. But so it's a big portfolio, but it's led by talented people. Our third organization is our Combat Training Center Directorate, and I kind of couch them with our TRADOC Proponency Office for OP4. And so they're modernizing our combat training centers. So all that, high tech stuff that's happening to us on the battlefield, they're replicating that in our home station and getting us prepared. They're also modernizing the combat training centers as well. Those are, I think we have two crown jewels in our Army, our Sergeant Major's Academy and our NCO development programs, and then our combat training centers. And Combat Training Center Directorate is the advocacy for all three of our CTCs, plus the support for the Mission Command Training Program. And then just the final other three, the National Sim Center, those are literally the pipes that the simulation feeds on, and they support all the Army's training, the mission training centers in the Army, and they have great support from our global sim capability, who just recently went out to the National Training Center and was able to connect Fort Riley back to Fort Irwin and conduct a big division-sized training event. And then the final two are our Mission Command Training Program. It's really our fourth CTC, but it's our high level CTC that manages it's the Chief of Staff's Army program through the Force Com and TRADOC Commander that really support the division and corps commanders' development. So they train those staffs. We do that. We do 6+ exercises a year. This year, we're getting ready to do the largest allied warfighter. It's called Warfighter 21-4, and we'll have our French, our two oldest allies, our French and the 3rd UK. So 4 divisions fighting with a Corps, and then really learning a lot about interoperability, and to collect all these great lessons and to conduct the management of knowledge in the Army. We have the Center for Army Lessons Learned, and that's COL, and they're a part of the CAC-T team now, and they're really helping us kind of proliferate these best practices so that they get them out of the Green Book and they become lessons applied. So that's in a nutshell kind of what we have going on in our formations. And I'll kind of just stand by for that.
Yeah, I think that was a good rundown. I think a lot of people, before they maybe come to CAC-T or before they, the biggest thing that they know about CAC-T is MCTP. I mean, they know that's the face of CAC-T, and they think that that's all that we have. So explaining some of the other things that we have, and that we added COL in recently in December, so I think that was good.
It's tough. I served as an OC for probably 60 plus rotations in my Army career at all 3 CTCs, and I was a commander of operations group at a combat training center, and I thought I knew what the Combined Arms Center for Training did. I've served around them. I've been in TRADOC. And so not until you get here, and then you see really how those 6 connect, and not only inside of CAC-T, but how they fit, I'd say, with my flank wingmen inside of the Combined Arms Center. So we all work hand in hand with General Mazzaracchi and the Mission Command Center of Excellence. Because, from the MCOE, he takes all those best practices and pushes it out of the Army for what then Shane Morgan and MCTP does to train and evaluate and coach. Right. General Hill, bringing it, at the Army University, he's the learning and education aspect of it. And so we're actually, all 3 of us are writing a Army training leader development vision strategy right now, and while we're writing this, we're seeing the connectivity and integration of all 3 of our of General Rainey's organizations come together, and how it really works in support of training and doctrine commanded by General Funk, and how TRADOC does. The victory does start here. It truly does in every form, whether the training environment, the education, and so throughout the institutional Army and the operational Army, you see where TRADOC does support from a foundational perspective.
All right, so I think that leads us into, what we're doing today, some of the initiatives.
Yeah.
What's on your whiteboard?
Well, my whiteboard is it's ever changing. It's full of a lot of great ideas, and the staff keeps erasing it because it gets too full and there's just too much to do. No, all kidding aside, I would say what keeps me up at night or keeps me excited to come to work in the morning are the following things. We're in the red zone of delivering FM 7.0 to the Army. General Rainey and the team, we've collaborated, I'd say, in a very radical manner, and opened up and received a lot of feedback from the entire Army. We started low at the lowest levels, and we've gotten sergeant feedback, troop company, battery commander feedback. I've shared it with all the 06s and the 1-stars, the commandants, the division commanders, the assistant division commanders. General Rainey has just recently shared it, and we've received an incredible amount of feedback from the Corps commanders, our 4-star RCOMs, and in previous TRADOC commanders and previous authors of it. So the training community, we're a soldier for life, and we our Army's got incredible mentors that aren't wearing the uniform anymore. All of them collectively have provided some incredible feedback, and so we're excited about 7.0, and we're trying to right size it to what doctrinally what you want to be able to do in the perfect conditions, but also provide like we talked about before, the context for junior leaders. Mm-hmm. For 11 years of not conducting decisive action and large-scale combat operations, you lose a lot of those repetitions that a generation of leaders would have had. And so, there's a lot of training myths out there that our soldiers don't get it. And, I just, after watching them from afar and admiring, we have an incredible talented amount of leaders in our Army today. If you think about it, they signed up after 9/11, and they've stayed in. They've look at the right sleeve of those men and women out there. They have about 6-7 combat stripes, which is 6 months. They have 5-6 years of deployed time at a minimum, and so they've got the experience. And now we got the best of that. Now they've done the last 5 years of kind of decisive action training. We just need to provide a fundamental how-to manual to kind of codify, how all of it connects together. Really disciplined training guidance and enough time to allow commanders to get that, he or she to have that 6-week lock-in. What does that mean? Why does that, why is that important? The big things that we do at CAC here in support of General Rainey is drive change and develop leaders. And so it is, the document is replete with multiple illustrations of leader development opportunities while training your formation. And I always say that training is the vehicle to develop leaders. The combat training centers were built to develop leaders. It was not a testing center, but a training center, an opportunity to try things out in a permissive environment to work through that. And so that's something that we're really focused on. It's small unit training, focused on the 8-step training model, and it's a deliberate kind of a paradigm to show leaders how they can plan, the training, develop and certify leaders, do the recon, execute the training, but then most importantly, have an after-action review, and then what in alignment with the Chief of Staff's training strategy, retrain. For a while we had such a thick, gated training strategy. Our company commanders, our squadron and battalion commanders, they didn't have a time to go back and retrain their platoons, and we all know lethal platoons and companies is what the success to winning on the battlefield. And so I think that this is a doctrinal manual that kind of allows that in support of the Army senior leaders' guidance of where we need to go. The second thing that we're working, and it's been 13 years in the making, is the Army Training Information System. Mm-hmm. And so I'm so excited about this, and I alluded to it earlier with what Colonel Greg Johnson's doing with IPSA, the Integrated Personnel Analysis. And what ATIS, though, is going to be able to do is truly pull our Army training management into the 21st century. There's Chief of Staff of the Army, General McConville, talks about, we need a talent management system that is a 21st century talent management, not an industrial age. And we're doing that with our leader development. General Maz is doing that in Project Athena with all the COEs. Well, we have to build the backbone, the connective, the pipes that connect all that, to have a repository of all the training that a soldier conducts. Often that is left from basic training to his first unit or he or she's first unit of assignment. And what we aim to do is really, and then through what Sergeant Major Khan and prior to him, Sergeant Major Scullion helped develop, was a digital job book and the small unit leader tool, which they are not CAC enabled, they're username password enabled for a leader on his own device to record training, to assess and look at his squad's training, and to populate it at one time, and then it's forever in those systems. And so the work we're doing in ATIS right now is we're building the backbone of it. It'll be out in the next 2 years for the Army by the 23, and we're using a lot of soldier touch points to help inform, because we got to get it right. It's DTMS to some people is a 4-letter word that they've not agreed upon, because at times it was not intuitive. So I think we're putting a lot of updates to it right now before we even transition it. So my big mantra to the team was, hey, we got to have confidence of the Army, and then DTMS and ATN have to be a unit of choice or a system of choice before it transitions. And so that's the other thing that we're really working, and I think we're making some good headway there. And then I think the final thing that it kind of couches a lot of our capabilities together is the CTC modernization. But I say that because that really informs all of home station training. And so we are rapidly, taking with our TRADOC Proponency Office for OPFOR and in concert with the Combat Training Center Directorate, increasing the capabilities at the NTC, at the combat at JRTC and the JMRC. A couple examples are drone swarms. Imagine it's 6 a.m. You're driving your tank. You arrive up into the city. The city's filled with smoke. You started getting shot at, so you're getting some forms of contact, and then all of a sudden 100 drones ascend upon you and your brigade combat team. What do you do next? It's those types of examples and those types of stimulus that we're modernizing, and we're also modernizing the OPFOR. Our OPFOR vehicles they're very old. I think they're on their their original fleet since the startup of the combat training centers. We had Sheridans for a while at the NTC, but then very rapidly we went to like a 113 system, and our soldiers are doing the Lord's work out there, Herculean effort to keep them in a safe manner. So we know we owe them professional vehicles that have good, good hybrid, we call them Viz mods, but visual kind of adaptable kit that we can portray multiple types of adversaries on it. And so we're working through that. And that home station modernization is all a part of the work that we're doing, I'd say finally, as I close out, in support of the synthetic training environment. Major General Gervais, a previous CAC-T commander, she started it in the 17 time frame, and we're in support of her, CFT, and really helping the synthetic training environment. And so, that's kind of that's been a bulwark of our effort. We're down in Orlando right now with them, but that next generation miles. And you think about what that has done for us over the last 40 years. It's served us well. It's going to continue to serve us, but there are evolutionary changes out there. So how we kind of tie in the live, virtual, and constructive and gaming environment together, and a lot of that is done here at CAC-T with our wonderful, our FA-57 officers, our simulations officers. We've got, we got the Ranger Regiment of simulations officers that serve here at Fort Leavenworth inside of Colonel John Barry's National Sim Center, and then they are doing, great work and leading and kind of pioneering that effort and getting those touch points throughout the year. But that's kind of what we do right now. It's a lot of great effort. A lot of it you won't see until the next few years, but I see change occurring every day, and it's our soldiers and civilians and leaders that all are really operating with that sense of urgency to be ready now and to help our Army win and fight and win today now. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I think all of that really sets the stage for future podcasts. I don't know what the next one's going to be on. Maybe the OPFOR, and we can talk about the CTC modernization, because that seems to be some of the questions we're getting from a lot of people. So
yeah, I think it'd be good.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me in our studio here at CAC-T headquarters today, and that does it for episode 0 of the Victory Through Training podcast. I'm going to tell our listeners to stay tuned for future podcasts and reach out to us if they have any questions. They can follow us on Facebook or Twitter at USACAC Training, or send us an email. All
well,
right.
I appreciate it. We need to stay connected, and thank you for enabling this. And victory is through training. So thank you very much, Tisha. Thanks a lot.
You have been listening to the Victory Through Training podcast, produced by the Combined Arms Center Training at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Views expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent the views of the Combined Arms Center, U.S. Army, or the U.S. government.